You are go.
Cool. Okay, so today we're going to learn about the IL movement, and then you're going to hear from some wonderful parents about how they've implemented it into their everyday lives for them and their kids. So, first and foremost, for anybody that's not familiar, the independent living philosophy and movement was started by and made for people with disabilities to focus on empowerment and people with disabilities having the same degree of self-determination, freedom of choice, and control over their everyday life as non-disabled people do. It means that we have the same choices, we have the same knowledge about our lives, and we have the capacity to decide what our lives look like and what needs to be in place to make that happen. At its core, the independent living movement really focuses on disabled people being the experts of the disability experience. So, for those of you that, are in therapies all the time and go to doctor's appointments all the time, this last bullet here is what really separates this movement, this philosophy, and these services from traditional medical services is that we're putting the power in the hands of the disabled person themselves. We are treating them as the experts on their own life and their own body. So before I get too far into this presentation, I don't think this is new to most of the people on here, but it's always good to have a little refresher, especially since you'll hear myself and our panelists use a lot of this language. And so just kind of a reminder on the importance of language and the phrases we're trying to move towards and the phrases we're trying to get away from. So the most popular on here is probably the euphemisms that we've come up with for disabled, so special needs, differently abled, handy capable is another one I keep seeing now. All of these euphemisms are essentially to avoid saying the word disability. So in this movement and within this philosophy, what we're really pushing is say the word disabled. Disabled is not a bad word. It's only formed a negative connotation because we as a society have given it one. And so the philosophy here is that if we can say the word disabled and take away some of the stigma, it's really more authentic to people's experience, and there's no reason that we can't claim that as part of who we are. Getting rid of handicapped, it's a very outdated word, and if you need it as an adjective, what we're trying to say is accessible. So the parking space is not handicapped, it's accessible. The person is not handicapped, they are disabled. Um, Wheelchair bound, this is another one that's really important within this movement because it was started by mostly people with physical disabilities. We are not bound to them. We are not stuck in them. Wheelchairs actually give us a lot of freedom to live the life that we want without having to try really, really hard to get around or interact with our environment. So instead of wheelchair bound, we say wheelchair user or person who uses a wheelchair. Victims, another one. We see a lot of victim language, a lot of suffering language. Disabled people aren't victims. We're not victims to our circumstance. We don't suffer. We live our lives. Saying intellectual disability instead of slow or delayed or cognitively challenged. Again, just putting the word disability in there. And then instead of like normal or typical, what we're really trying to say there is somebody has a disability or they don't. So where normal sort of implies superiority over people that have disabilities, the idea is that you're either disabled or you're non-disabled. Nobody is more normal or typical than anybody else. Uh, we can't talk about independent living without talking about Ed Roberts. Ed Roberts is affectionately known as the father of independent living. He opened the first SIL in 1972 in Berkeley after he was accepted to UC Berkeley as a student. but because he had polio and slept in an iron lung at the time, once they found out, they tried to revoke his acceptance. They didn't want him to come to the school anymore, but he had gotten in on merit and on grades and was like, I have just as much right to be here as anybody else. And so he fought to be accommodated and eventually was, and then realized that there were many other students with disabilities who wanted to be there but didn't have the accommodations they needed. And so the first Center for Independent Living opened in Berkeley by himself and a group of other disabled people. We'll talk about some other ones in a little bit, but it was really the first time that disabled individuals got together to fight for equality and what they need and tried to replicate it throughout our country. And they were very successful. Independent living centers are now federally mandated. So every major city in the country has its own independent living center, and they all operate under the same core services and attitudes and beliefs, which we'll go over in a minute. These are just two of my favorite quotes from Ed. It says, the greatest lesson of the civil rights movement is that the moment you let others speak for you, you lose. And then the next one says, I realize that disability is actually a strength and can be very powerful. And that's really at the crux of what we're trying to do here is encourage independence, but also embrace disability, embrace being a part of the disability community, talk about the strengths that it gives us, and really understand what this experience is like from the individual's perspective. Any questions on Ed or the history or anything like that before I keep talking? We're good. Michelle, I also can't see the chat, so if anybody puts anything in the chat, somebody just interrupt me. And don't mind my dog, who wants to also be part of the conversation.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so these are the core principles. We've got dignity of risk, we've got consumer control, advocacy, community integration, and informed choice. So all independent living centers operate within these principles, and we're gonna go over what each one is and what it means. Consumer control basically is the idea that individuals have power, authority, and responsibility over your own life. And oftentimes within the disability community and within disability services, we almost unconsciously hand over the control from a very early age. And this is just how the system has been set up. This is, you get a diagnosis, you get specialists, you get rehab professionals, and suddenly you're surrounded by a lot of people who are making a lot of choices that affect you and your kid. And so this is the idea that you as a family and they as an individual should be the ones with the authority and the control. So how does this impact your kids where they are now? I know most of you still have kids that are pretty young, but this is the idea that they should understand what's going on in their body and they should have the ability to say yes or no, right? We always want, from however old they are, when they have the ability, we want them to be an active and engaged member of the process of the decisions that affect them and the places they go. And we want to encourage their ability to give consent and their ability to give their own opinion and really understand what's going on around them. Because so often we get stuck in a cycle where a lot of these decisions are just being made, and we get to a point that they don't understand what the decisions are for and what choices they actually have. So who's in control? This is basically like, and a lot of you have heard me say this in some of the other presentations we've done, but what it comes down to is their voice being encouraged? That's not to say that you guys as the parents don't get to be the parents, right? They still need to follow the rules you set, etc. However, so often when they're going and participating in things, or their lives are kind of set up for them, or their days are kind of instructed for them, we get into patterns where they're not making even the basic decisions for themselves. So this is the idea of where can we offer decision and choice. And a lot of this comes back to one of the key movements within the independent living movement, which was nothing about us without us. And this is the opposite of what most of us have come to expect for disabled individuals. A lot of decisions and a lot of control is taken away from them at an early age. So the idea that we shouldn't be making decisions for them without them and without their knowledge is super important. And this applies on an individual level, but it also applies on a societal level. So if we think about special education, if we think about laws that are made to enforce or take away disability rights, so many of these bigger decisions are being made without disabled people's knowledge or consent, right? So they're making decisions for a community of people that aren't being included in the conversation. And this is why a lot of these tie together, because we'll talk about why advocacy is so important in a minute, but the idea that disabled people should have a seat at the table so we can control the decisions being made about us is super important. This was a quote from who is affectionately known as the mother of independent living. If Ed Roberts is the father, she's the woman that kind of led the charge on the other side. And it says independent living is not doing things yourself, it's being in control of how things are done. And this is a really important distinction because certain disabilities mean that not everybody will do everything completely independently all the time, and that's okay. However, just because they need help with something doesn't mean the control should be taken away from them. So like one of the best examples I have of this is I've had several friends through college and then post college where their disabilities make it such that they are going to need help, right? They need help with activities of daily living. They need help with getting different things throughout the day. But the schedule of when those people come and what they do and how they do it and what it looks like and where they go and why they're going there, that's all on them, right? So that person is facilitating their independence, but they're not making the choices for them. They're still giving the disabled person the control. The next one's community integration, and this is exactly what it says. Disabled people get to live and participate fully in all aspects of life in their community. This is really important for kiddos because we really want to start from a young age the idea that they're part of the disability community, and then as part of the disability community, they can be part of their larger community. Right, so understanding what that means, having access to others within their community, being able to engage and participate, and then not always doing things that are completely segregated, right? So a lot of programming is still to this day set up so that you're either segregated because you have a disability or you're segregated by disability. And we're really trying to get away from that and encourage the idea of community integration and disabled individuals being a part of the community and being a part of everyday life. So when we are included and we're embracing our community, we are within our community. We're not having separate places where it's like, okay, the community is here, but disabled people go here. And this idea really started out of the need for support And the original idea being that if we could put everybody in one place and put the support in one place, then everybody wins. But then what started to happen was disabled people weren't being seen or recognized as a part of the larger community. And so that includes living on your own or with your family, going to work, going to school, being involved in what anybody else gets to be involved in, because that's ultimately what creates a life that's fulfilling. And it's ultimately what creates a life where people are motivated to do the things even if they're difficult. So, like, as a disabled person who lives her life every day, I'm not going to tell you that this is easy, but I'm going to tell you that I've created a life where I want to do it. Right? So if they're not being given the opportunity to be integrated into these things and do these things just like anybody else, the motivation to go over those hurdles isn't going to be there. And then advocacy. So I think the most important distinction here is that it's not enough just to be aware that there are issues. If I stop this conversation and I asked you to all give me things that need to change in our society to make our lives easier or so that our kids are treated more equally, I'm willing to bet you could all come up with lots of examples of changes that need to happen and what needs to be different and where things need to change, because we are all very aware. Being part of this community by default is going to make you aware of what needs to change and what's not equal. But we need the awareness and the action to create the change. And there's two levels to this. One is you guys as parents taking action. And I know you could give me lots of examples on how you do this probably on a daily basis and advocating for your kids and their needs. But the other piece to this is your kids learning that they need to advocate for themselves. As a disabled individual, so much of our lives is going to be advocacy and going to be advocating for what we need. The issue that tends to arise is if these skills aren't built from an early age, it gets really hard to do as an adult. So the idea that you're allowed to speak up if you need something, or the idea that you're allowed to speak up if something isn't fair or equal is it's really hard to do in certain situations. And so letting your kids know that it's okay to do that as early as possible and as often as possible is going to give them the confidence to do it in their everyday lives. And this is anything from, barriers to participation to things they need to make their lives easier that they're entitled to. It's like a running joke in my family now that whenever we're out in public, they're like, oh man, like if she sees something, nobody's safe. Nobody's getting away from it. And that's on purpose. That's on purpose. If we go to dinner and I can't get to the restaurant, I'm not just gonna go somewhere else. I'm gonna say something. If we're taking public transportation and a bus goes by that doesn't have a wheelchair space in it, I'm gonna say something. We all need to get to the point where, as members of this community, we're all saying something and we're all taking action because it's going to take every single one of us to make these changes. And the problem is the system is set up under the idea that we should just take what we can get. That's like the general slogan that describes the state of disability advocacy right now is, but we've made some progress and we should be grateful and we should take what we can get. You heard it from me, folks. That's a bunch of crap. Okay? The Americans with Disabilities Act has existed for 34 years now. Okay? And even within that law, what we're being given is the bare minimum to participation. So if that's already not being enforced, we still have a very long way to go. So, what does this mean for you guys? It means that you as a parent know how to advocate for the needs of your own child, even though in a lot of situations, people will try to tell you otherwise. So being secure in the knowledge that you do know what's best, your child knowing their rights and being able to self-advocate, and then advocating for the rights of the disability community as a whole, and also listening to yourself and your child. Because we're put in a lot of situations where we're going to be influenced to do what's easier for everybody, or what causes the least amount of friction, or what is the most doable in any given moment. And if you know that that's not good enough, that's okay. You're allowed to listen to yourself and your kid and their needs and push back. Even if we shouldn't have to, it's important that we do, because that's how we create the change. Informed choice is the next one. And this is having all of the information about all of your options, but then also having the right to make whatever decision needs to be made based on those options. So informed choice impacts a lot of different areas of our lives, but this is the idea that, are your kids informed? First and foremost, are they informed about their own disability? Because in a lot of cases, that answer is still no. And I know from working with a lot of you that that's a really difficult conversation to have, and I fully get that. But it's the idea that their disability is going to impact how they interact with the world. And I don't say that as a negative thing. I just say that as a fact, right? It's going to influence how we engage, and it's going to influence what we need, and it's going to influence what we do. And they need to be aware of that so they can make informed choices. Are they given an active role in making choices that concern them? And again, I know a lot of them are still young, so I'm not saying like they get to overrule you necessarily, but as they age, they need the skills to be able to say, these decisions aren't just being made about me without my consent. I understand the choice. And then the other side to that, and probably the more difficult side to that, is they need to be given the opportunity to make a choice, even if it's not the one you would agree with. Even if it's not the one that all the adults in the room might agree with, they still need the ability to make a choice. And we're going to talk about dignity and risk in a second. These two tie together, but we all make choices every day. And some of them end up being the right choice, and some of them end up being the wrong choice. But we need to know we can do that. And then they need to understand their disability and the information about it, rather than it just being an other. A lot of times we, especially if we're accommodating the disability, it kind of takes a back seat, right? And they need to understand what it is and what role it plays in their life and as part of their identity, so that they can be more confident in making those choices about themselves. And then this is my favorite one. This independent living principle is called the dignity of risk. And basically what this means is that disabled individuals have the same right to take a risk, to make decisions, and also make mistakes. Okay, mistakes and failures are such an important part of life. And just like anybody else, they need to have the right and the chance to experience them, because we all learn so much from making decisions that either pay off or don't. So it's really important to allow disabled individuals the opportunity to make their own choices. And there's a lot of dignity in not only making the choice, but then failing or succeeding. and having to figure that out individually, right? So if you can take a chance and you can be responsible for the outcome, you're building your ability to make those choices independently, and you're building the ability to trust yourself. It's so important to be able to say, it's okay if this doesn't work out, because especially as you get older, if you're not making a choice because there's a chance of failure, there's a lot that you're going to miss out on. A lot. Because if we're avoiding failure, we're avoiding a lot of the things that make us mature adults at some point. Right, Dusty, I know it's very important, right? He agrees. And so on the other side of this, if you take, let's say you take a really big risk and you weren't sure how it was going to work out and you succeed, right? If you've got a team of people around you that facilitated that entire decision-making process and made it so that you didn't fail, you also don't get to take credit for the outcome. And this goes back to the motivation that I was talking about earlier. If I work really hard at something and I don't know if it's going to work out or not, but I'm going to try because it's important to me, I need to know how I got myself there. To be like, oh, I can do that again. Right? Like it feels really good when it works out. But if you don't get the process of it feeling really good in the end because you weren't the one to make the choice, that motivation to keep doing the difficult things isn't going to be there. Basically, what this comes down to, and this is to summarize the dignity of risk, and probably the most important part, is that failure is a part of life and something we all learn from as we grow and mature. And at the end of the day, you don't know until you try. We could sit here and say, they probably won't be able to do that, or that probably won't go well, or that might end in disaster. But the idea is, we don't know. Nobody knows. Nobody has a guarantee with their difficult choices or difficult situations that it's going to work or it's not. We cannot say with 100% certainty until we actually try. But that fear of failure takes so much of us out of even the idea to try. So then we never know. And I can tell you from experience that your kids deserve better than that. They deserve the opportunity to try and fail and try again, or try and succeed and be really happy about it. So now we're going to shift it over to our wonderful panel. And what I'm going to do, just so I can see everybody, is I'm going to close these out. These are just the questions, so I promise you're not missing much. I'm just going to, they're going to be here so I can read them, but I can see everybody that's here and call out the panelists that I know should be saying something. So the first question, and I'll open this up to all of you. Tell us what independence means to you and your kids. So whichever one of you wants to start, feel free.
I know, I think I said this last time, but independence for me means less work for me to do. The more he can do, the less I have to do. The more decisions he can make for himself, the fewer decisions I have to make for him. Independence is freedom in whatever form that takes for my family.
And it's totally okay to repeat yourself because most of these people weren't here. Go for it.
I was
I can
actually
mirror.
thinking,
Oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead, Amy. Go ahead. No, stop. I was actually thinking I wish I had written down my responses from the last session, so I wouldn't have to think so much. Um, independence for me, because I think because I have a background in education, I was always thinking about teaching things. Um, oh, mother, yeah, thank you, perfect. That's my mom. I think that when I think about independence for my son with autism, I think about what the future is going to be like. And I would love nothing more than for him to be an independent adult. He's one of 5 children in our family. I have all girls, and then I have a sweet little boy right in the middle. And I assumed when I got old that he was going to come take out my trash and put up the Christmas lights and all the things that kids do to take care of their parents when they get old. And I worry about him not being able to be that independent. I worry about who's going to take care of him after I'm gone. And so for me, I think if he can be independent as an adult, if that's a possibility, then my best shot at getting him to that point is to be 6-year-old independent at 6 years old. And so just kind of reverse engineering that, I think about he just turned 7. And so my goal this year is to get to where he's as independent as a non-disabled 7-year-old is. And that may look different. But the more I can get him on track for that, the more likely he will be able to be, the better shot he has at being independent as an adult.
Amy, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, my independence for my family is kind of exactly what Courtney said too. If I give them more independence, then I can reclaim mine. I'm not supervising them and structuring their day and dictating what they're doing. They're doing that, and then in turn that gives me back the independence I need to grow myself. And I think that's very important for us. So.
I think that the ladies covered it well, but Bridget has her hand up. So Bridget, do you have a question about independence?
No, it was more of my opinion of what it is. It's just being a functioning adult in society for me, just because if they're like, they claim independence and they're on their own, for me, that would be them being able to, read social cues, be able to take care of their hygiene, their chores, make their medical appointments, things like that. And for me, for them, it would be able to function that way on their own without so much support. So that's my take on it, I guess.
Awesome. You're muted, Gabby.
I think you guys all covered it really well. And I think another thing that really sticks out for me, and I get the privilege of knowing our panelists pretty well, so I get to fill in too. But I think another thing that really sticks out for me is that I've watched you all take steps to independence. And I think that we sometimes get stuck in this idea of like, they're either independent or they're not, right? You're either going to be independent or you're not. And the idea that we all learn independence as we grow and as we age is the same for kids with disabilities, right? It's no different just because they're disabled. It's just the idea that, are we promoting their level of independence right now? And are we continuing to do that as they age? Michelle, you want to add anything?
No, I think it's great, but I do think it's important that you start this process off all of like trying to incorporate all of these principles as young as possible. I know Gabby and I've had these conversations before where, parents will wait till their kids are like 18, 19, 20, and they're like, okay, I want them to be independent now. And we're like, okay, that does not switch overnight. Like they don't hit 18 and all of a sudden they're independent, adult. Like we have to start incorporating these things as early as possible, letting them try and fail as early as possible, teaching them how to do, you know, daily living skills as early as possible so that they can grow into independent adults, because it is not going to happen, you know, with a flick of a switch when they're 18 or 21.
You know what I love about, one of the things that I love about all of this is that I think all of these, while they're super important for our children with disabilities and for disabled people in general, these are also really great parenting strategies across the board. If any, you know, a non-disabled person gets to be 18 without having parents that were focused on trying to help them be independent, like, they would not be independent either. You know what I mean? And so it just looks, all of these things are things that non-disabled children need to do and learn as well. It just maybe looks, our process for doing it looks different. Our need to do it is probably greater, I would say. The amount of work it takes to do and get there is probably greater as well. And so, but I think that every time I learn something new about the independent living movement, or about even it down to the things that my son needs in place to be able to learn, they're all things that are just great teaching strategies anyway for anybody.
Yeah.
I love what Hilda put in the chat box. Independence for me is not to be stressed or worried, especially, I mean, how many of us have ever said, like, what's going to happen to our kids when I'm no longer around? Like, all of us have had that fear, right? But the more independent we can make our children, the less we have that fear of what happens to them when we're no longer around. I was reading this one book, and it was a book of different mothers and their different stories. And one of those stories that really clicked with me was, there was a mom and she was doing total care for her son. And her son looked at her and said, "Mom, you're not getting any younger." He was like, "I want to live on my own, and I want to figure this out now while you're alive." Right? Like, let's figure this out now. Let's start putting these things in place now. I want to be independent now. And she made it happen. And the end of her little chapter was like her going on a tour in France or something. And she was like, I literally like set it up so my son was living independent with support, right? But then she also then gained that freedom to be able to travel and experience her own life again. So I thought that was just a really cool example of, like, we shouldn't wait till we're like on death's door to set up the supports that we need for our kids, right? And to like have them be as independent as possible. So I don't know, that like connected with me, especially with what you were saying there, Kelly.
Yeah, for sure.
Can I mention a story I heard regarding
Sure.
that? I just happened upon this couple, and they had a little, an elderly woman with Down syndrome sitting between them. And I stopped to talk to them, and because they looked about the same age, and she said, "Yes, I'm her sister." And I said, "How did you make that transition?" And she said that she lived in Tempe and her mother lived in Tucson. They grew up in Tucson. And that when they hit a certain age and knew that, you know, they weren't going to outlive their daughter for sure, it had always been that they would go up for the weekend and see the sister. And slowly over like 10 years, they shifted from going to see the sister to really living with the sister and going to see the mom. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just slowly, a little bit at a time. They would do 2 days and then 3 days at the sisters, and then 4 days at the sisters, and 3 days at mom, 5 days at the sister, and 2 days with mom, until she was, and the sister just, she said, there were so many questions that I had, and my mom was still there to answer them. So I always loved that story. It helped me picture that as such a, I mean, we all can't have it that great, but you know, if we can shoot for that.
Yeah. No, thanks, Camille. That's awesome.
Okay, so the next question to our panelists says, what's an example of how you've integrated one or more of the independent living principles for your kids?
So I'll just give a quick example. So the consumerism and like the knowing what your choices are and getting to make them. We just went on a cruise, and my husband and I had chosen the activities the kids were going to do before the cruise because we had to register for them before. We did not tell our kids about the cruise until like a week before because that was not going to be great if they knew for a long time that we were going on this cruise. So while we were on the cruise, you know, Jackson started seeing pictures and images of like all the different stuff that was happening. And we had pre-picked their activities. So Jackson all of a sudden was like, whoa, like there's all of this other stuff and I want to do that. And so he kept pointing to the Jeep. He got his AAC device and he was like, I want Jeep. And we're like, okay, like we got to figure out how to get him on a Jeep and a Jeep tour and like do his thing. Like that's what he wanted to do on his vacation. And it really kind of sank in that I'm like, I wish we could have had them pick way earlier, but we still let him pick. And he had the best time. Matt and him like went on a Jeep tour and Matt brought back all these videos and Jackson was just like having the best time. So just things like that, like really listening when they're asking and advocating for themselves and what they want and being like, yes, like you want to do that, like we're gonna figure out how to get that for you. And it was just so gratifying to see him do those kinds of things and have access to that.
And I think that's important too, because like listening and paying attention, like Jackson communicates differently, right? So you really had to pay attention and be like, oh, this is what he wants. This is what he's trying to tell me is important to him or what he wants. And we have to make it happen. He didn't come up to you and say, I think we should schedule a Jeep tour. You know, so you had to pay attention.
I feel for us now, I mean, Amy's children, she has many children with disabilities. So Amy and I, for some of our kids, relate on this and some don't. But with my son, his disability, you know, he has pretty profound issues happening. So he doesn't really necessarily choose, but what he does do for the consumer control is he says no a lot. He does not want to do a lot of things. And he is very clear in that communication. No, I do not want to do a power wheelchair. No, I do not want to play this game in speech. There's a funny story from his speech therapist is wonderful. And he had his eye gaze communication out and he asked her, do you have any pets? And she said, yes. And she went on and on and on. And he said, stop. Like, I don't want to hear about your pets anymore. That's enough. So for him, you know, letting him interact with his environment to his choosing to a certain extent, you know, he's 9. He doesn't get to make all of his choices. That would be insane. But letting him have control. If he doesn't want to do something and it's reasonable in that moment, then he doesn't have to do it. That's okay. We'll pivot.
And I think it's important for people to understand too with Kemp, like you've been really diligent in making sure he has ways to say yes and no.
Yeah.
Because again, we make a lot of assumptions about how kids are supposed to communicate and what that's supposed to look like. And for Kemp, it's not verbally, but he will tell you yes or no.
It's a lot of getting on his level and figuring out what communication looks like for him. Another example I was thinking of, it's more dignity of risk, kind of. Again, it's hard with him because he isn't, you know, he's not a kid that's going to climb on a structure or want to try a new hobby or something. Like he's not that level of taking risk, but we have been spending more time in water because it's so hot. And he has a flotation that goes around his neck because he isn't mobile. He can't swim, but we can use the flotation to keep his head above water, which is terrifying because it's not perfect, right? He could roll and drown. Like he's not going to. I'm right there, but allowing him to take that risk and be in the water when it's hot and feel less tension in his muscles, you know, it's an important childhood experience. And so getting on that level with him of learning what communication looks like for Kemp, learning what consent and affirmation looks like, just making that eye contact with him is what I do, explaining what we're going to do. And if he looks at me directly and looks excited, then that's a yes. And so we do it. And if he turns away, then that is a no, and we don't do it. But you know, risking potentially letting my kid drown, which I knew would not happen, but still allowing that risk is good for him.
Yeah, it is.
I wanted to share a little bit about community integration because I have been trying to venture out of our home a lot more with my very active son. Henry has always been a runner and a wanderer and a lot of things that make it really terrifying to take him out in public. But I have been trying really hard to put all the things in place that we need to keep him safe so that we can take some of those risks, but also so that he can be integrated into the community. A friend of ours gave us some advice. They have an adult son. He's a young adult with pretty severe autism. And my husband was like, what do you do? Like, how do you parent that? He asked that early on. And he said, we tried to expose him to as many things as we could. And so I've been thinking about that with Henry. And I thought, okay, I have to be able to get this boy to be out in public, to be part of the community. And I think that it's going to take some work on both sides. It's going to take some work from Henry, and it's also going to take some work from the community to get used to that the way he does things looks a little different. But one of the things that I want to say has been a really great blessing along those lines of community integration is we have a pediatric dentist who is the best I've ever seen. For a person who is not so much part of the disability community, but he adapts everything he does so that Henry can be comfortable there. So we've started doing what this dentist calls happy visits, where Henry gets to go, instead of going to the dentist every 6 months and forgetting the whole process and not being able to get through it and screaming and hollering and all of those things, we go every week or two to the dentist and they work through the process with him. So we sit through the waiting room and someone comes out and calls his name and we go into a room where the hygienist lets him see the tools and push the button that makes the chair go up and down and all of those things just to get him more comfortable with it. And she's really excited and really enthusiastic. And then the dentist comes in and he says, hi, Henry. And he sits down and he gets out the tools and he starts with just the mirror, the little mirror they check your teeth with. And he says, Henry, do you want to look at my mirror? And he hands it to him and they just play for a few minutes. And then the next time we went in, we went through all of that stuff. And he said, Henry, this time I want to look at your teeth with the mirror. And so they look at his teeth and Henry's just giggling and giggling and giggling. And the next time we go on, he's like, Henry, can we count your teeth with my mirror? And so he went through and just, we've gotten more and more progress. In the meantime, he has a really fantastic care plan in case Henry needs work done. But the last time we were in, he got the sharp instrument into his mouth and was touching his teeth. And I am like beside myself amazed that we're at this place. And to contrast that, I took him to the doctor, the pediatrician, for his checkup. I'm really grateful that Henry has an incredible immune system. That boy is almost never sick. He hasn't needed antibiotics for anything, maybe ever, which is not the norm in our house. But he did okay for a little bit, and then he was like, nope, this is too much. I'm out of here. He started screaming and screaming and screaming, and didn't want the doctor to look in his ears because he hates that part. And so as part of the informed choice and autonomy, I said to the doctor, I said, what are you looking for in a well check when you look at his ears? And she explained to me, and I said, would you consider that an absolute necessity, or is it okay if we let him choose this one? Because I wanted him, I said, part of where we are is that I'm trying to teach him that he has some autonomy. He has control over his body and what happens to it. And she's like, absolutely, let's do it. And so I was like, okay, Henry. And he said, all done, no thank you, all done, no thank you. I said, okay, we're all done with that. There was lots of screaming, there was running through the halls, there was all the things. And so we'll get better at it. But I just love the way that my dentist offers these happy visits, and the insurance absolutely won't cover it, and he doesn't want to put any undue burden on me, so he does it absolutely for free. And he even said, I recognize the sacrifice it's going to take on your part to bring him here every week or two, and I'm happy to make up the rest so that we can help him be comfortable. And I thought, wouldn't it be so great if the community as a whole, if it was like that everywhere you go, where we'll do what we need to do to make this work?
Yeah, and that's a really good example of like shifting the environment and not trying to fix the person too. I think so often with disability, it's like the responsibility is for your kid or the disabled person in general to just get it together and figure it out. And this idea that disability is socially constructed and we need to be focusing on fixing the environment and the situations and not forcing people to be something they're not or go against, their natural way of being, I think is really important.
On that note, if your child is loud and wild, they still deserve to go to the public library.
Amy, what about your example?
Well, I have so many because I do have a lot of kids. Is there one that you want me to share in this space?
I want you to share all of them, so just pick whichever.
This is, I don't want to take up all the time.
Right. I mean, we still have an hour. We're doing okay.
Will you repeat the question, Gabby?
Yeah, this one is just was an example of how you've integrated the independent living principles into.
Well, because I have such a special bond with Care for the Caregivers and the people that are the utmost examples of all of these parts of independent living, we've kind of incorporated all of them with each one of our children. So I think the dignity of risk is probably our favorite here in the house, and thinking about that on a daily basis of what that looks like. Because it seems pretty basic, but it's not really. We really have to really think about how we do that. But I and my husband, like for one example with Allison, who is autistic, for the longest time we fought her getting a job, we fought her getting a driver's license. She is 18. All of the things that scared me about that were at the focus of that decision of putting it off and not wanting to expose her to the harshness of the work world. I was afraid she'd get fired. All the things, because I'm a catastrophic thinker, were very much limiting what I was allowing. And when we took on the idea of dignity of risk, and Gabby's like, what's the worst that could happen? Well, she could get fired. And what's really bad about that? Like, really couldn't argue. So Allison,
at least once. We all get fired at least one time.
We always get fired. We did allow Allison to get a job. It didn't last long, but in that brief moment, of time, we learned so much, and it gave her independence. It gave her confidence, because all of these things really tie in, right? Like the advocacy skills to say, wait a minute, I don't agree with that. She could speak up at work and say, no, I'm not doing that. That's going to put me in danger. Just all of these things that she would come home and be like, Mom, they tried to do this and I'm not comfortable. And I said, and, were real big examples of maturity and growth, but also able to speak up, because the Allison that before wouldn't have done that. She would have just done whatever they told her to do. But we had given her those skills prior to say, no, that's not safe, or no, I'm not doing that, which she has the right to do. Now, she did not stay long at that job, which I was okay with. But that was on her kind of accord. She didn't go about leaving well, but we talked through that. And at the end of the day, she has a great job now. She's doing well. She's advocating for herself. She's in that space. She's making money. She's growing confidence. All the skills that a normal life for an 18-year-old would provide, right? So a a child that is non-disabled, that is 18, would do all of those things. At 18, I had a job, right? I had a driver's license. And so really thinking in terms of that, what did I do at 18? What did that look like? Why am I not providing that for her? She does drive. She has a driver's license. She has gotten a car accident, and I can kind of tell you a little bit about that independence. When it happened, I was beside myself. My husband called, "Oh my gosh, what do you mean?" You know, of course, she was safe, and my husband's like, "Well, I'm not with her anymore." And I was like, "What do you mean you're not with her? You just left the scene?" And he was like, "Yeah, she had it under control. She needs to learn. The cop was there. The other person was there. They were exchanging insurances. I told her what to do and I left." Now, the mom brain of me is like screaming, "You left." But the other part of me that knows that that was a huge opportunity for growth and dignity of risk. These are life skills that she needs to learn. I was in a car accident at 18. My mom didn't come. You know, I had to learn all those things. So it's like just equating. Sometimes the focus of the world for us was just like protect, protect, protect. Put a bubble around and protect these kids. And our bubble has popped. And now we are like, no, actually protecting these kids is also letting them learn and grow and mature at their level. And, you know, kind of like the same thing that Kelly said, like just making sure that they're safe and their supports, like we're not just like letting them off into the world, but we have parameters and allow them to really soar. Like Allison wanted to go to Montana for prom. Again, mom's brain was screaming, "No, no, no, there's a flight. She says, I'm gonna pay for it." Okay. You know, and she did. She paid for her flight. She flew to Montana. Of course, I had people up there and my family up there that, you know, made sure that everything was okay if something were to go wrong, but she did it. And at the end of the day, that really, really empowered her. I have a daughter that's at college who has seizures. We were called yesterday for a seizure, but really empowering her too. I think a lot of people that I know would not necessarily let their child live on their own or be in that space. And it's taken a lot of growth on my side as well, just letting that kind of progress, because she's 21 and she needs to learn how to live out in the world, and she has. And that's because we took a step back and put her healthcare and her autonomy in her hands. Now I'm there if they need me, for whatever we're reason, first responders, and my husband is one. But for whatever reason, they feel like they need to talk to an adult, even though she is an adult, primarily being me. But I always say on there, what does Kylie want? You know, when they call me on the phone, does Kylie want me to come? Please ask her. And sometimes it's yes, and sometimes it's no. Yesterday, I wasn't even in town, and it was her coworker that's calling me. He's like, "What should I do?" I said, "You just make sure that they listen to her. You know what she wants. They need to listen to her." And I'm on my way, so I can at least get her car, but I don't need to be there. So it's just those examples of dignity of risk, and then how that plays along in advocacy for themselves. And in the long run, they're making those decisions. And then listening to like Jace is nonverbal. I have to look for clues. You know, you have to look for clues for Jace when it comes to independence, what he's asking, what he's doing. You know, like he absolutely, for some reason, hates my daughter's car right now. I don't know why, but I'm going to let him make that decision, because who am I to be like, you don't want to ride in this car, I'm going to force you in the car. And it's going to be tears all the way around and everybody's going to be dysregulated. Like there's something about the car that's bothering him, and he can't communicate to me that other than say no and then crying. So just listening for those clues. He had a movement study recently or last year, and during it, you could see him start to get panicked. He started, even though it's like non-evasive, like we're putting stuff on him, but nobody was telling him what was happening. They were just doing it. And that's really important in our home, is to talk to them, don't talk at them. Even yesterday with the first responders, they had better outcome because we have it in her protocol on her phone. Please talk to Kylie, don't talk at her. That gives her peace of mind. With Jace, it was, can you please explain? I told everybody, I need you to stop. Everybody stop what you're doing. And can we focus on Jace and tell him what's happening? Let's talk to him. Give him decisions of whether he wants that, piece of tape where you're putting it. Can we just take a breath instead of like 4 people standing over him putting lights on him? Like, he didn't know what was going on. And that's just the medical model, right? We go in, we do our job, we focus, but like really paying attention to what was going on and saying, hey, we're not doing this anymore. And Jace has to have some ownership in this because he's scared. Look at him, he's scared. So that's what dignity of risk and independence looks like for us. Just really thinking out of the box and focusing on really what's important and the autonomy of the kids in our home. If that was all the things.
Yeah, no, those are all really good examples. And I think what these guys are all hitting on too that's really important to remember is like, nobody has all of the answers. That's not, independence doesn't mean we know how to do it and we go do it and everything's gonna be fine. It means like we're all learning together. And so are we including these opportunities, and are we including this way of thinking of like they get to learn through it just like anybody else does? And I think that that's really important. Dignity of risk is one that comes up all the time, comes up a lot. And it's the idea that, it might not work, but we're gonna try, we're gonna figure it out, because anybody at this age, at this time in their life would try and figure it out. My biggest example of that one, I think it was a really pivotal moment for me, was going to college. And my mom's always like really, really pushed independence. She always told me from a very early age that I was going to be independent. She had the same expectations for me that she did any of my 5 siblings. So if she expected them to do something, she expected me to do it. It was always pretty equal. And then she was the one that said you can go to college anywhere you want. So that's what I did. I went to college in Florida, and I was like, she was like, but that's a plane ride away. I was like, yeah, but I hate the snow, and there's no snow there, and it's gonna be warm all the time, and it's gonna be great. And I went to Florida, and for like 3 weeks, she was sending people to my dorm to like help me clean it and help me cook and do my laundry and all that. And I kept opening the door and being like, bye, see you later. Like, I'm not gonna be the college freshman who's got somebody in here doing my laundry, right? But it was like, we had hit my mom's threshold, and she was like, I just gotta know that she's okay. But she had given me the skills by that point to be like, this is not what I need. And any other freshman in here has not done their laundry for a month either. So if I have a month's worth of laundry, everybody's gonna be fine. It's gonna be fine. If my room is a mess, it's gonna be fine. If I stay up too late the night before and I miss a class, it's gonna be fine, right? Because that's on me to figure all that out, and I did, right? But it's the idea that like I had the skills by that point to know that I was gonna be okay, and that's dignity of risk. So my next question for my lovely panelists is, tell us about a challenging situation you've been able to work through when prioritizing independence, and what was helpful.
I have one from just this week, actually. I've been talking about taking Henry out to public places more and more often. Henry has 2 younger sisters and 2 older sisters, And just because of a lot of the challenges that we've had in life, I actually have never taken my 3 youngest children together in public by myself. My youngest was born a year and a half ago, and shortly after that, I ended up with sepsis and back in the hospital. And so we've had a kind of a long recovery period. And also, bless those little children, they are a challenge. And so
It's all about this.
we went to story time this week at the mall, just outside the play place. They have a story time, and I thought, well, I don't know how this is gonna go, but we're gonna give it a try. But one of the things that I did was I made sure that I took all of our tools with us. Henry has gotten to where he does pretty well with PECs, and if he can see what's happening, he's so visual. If he can see what's happening and know what to expect, then he seems to be able to stay calm better. So I took his first then board so that he would know, like, when we're getting ready to sit, then we're gonna first story time and sit and then play and that kind of thing. I even took one that has a picture of our red minivan so that we would do first play and then go to the car so he would know what's coming. He has a visual timer that helps him to kind of gauge how long we have for things. And so as it was getting closer to story time, I pulled it out and I said 10 minutes and then story time, and he'd say 10 minutes and then walk away to go play. But by making sure that we had our tools, the things that we had practiced at home with us, and by taking a risk, I mean, I think my husband thought I was nuts and was worried I'd lose one of them. And I'll be honest, I was a little bit worried about that too. But by doing those things that we'd practiced at home and taking a risk, but making sure also that we had the tools with us that we needed, we had a great time. And there was no screaming or crying or meltdowns. And the kids held it together pretty well too. So it was a good trip for us.
Awesome.
I think for our family, it was really kind of establishing that good morning routine with Jackson so that Jackson can kind of get himself up, can get himself dressed for school. He can come down and turn on the TV and get his breakfast bar. And he is like completely independent in the morning. And it's so nice because Jackson gets up at like 5 o'clock every single morning. So it's like, so he's up and he's up doing his own thing and he's dressed for school and he's already had his breakfast and he's just like downstairs watching his show. And we don't have to worry about, is he okay, is he gonna elope, is he gonna run off, is he down there not wearing anything, is he starving? It's like, no, like Jackson can take care of Jackson if he needs to for the morning. And that freed up Matt and I to sleep in. Well, you guys know me, I don't sleep in, or to work out, or to like do painting in the morning, or to do something for myself so that I have time to get ready for my crazy day. And he is just being able to do what he wants and get ready for the stress of his day, right? Like our kids are always on. And so for Jackson to just be able to have the mornings where he kind of rules his own little world is fantastic for him.
I just want to reiterate that took a lot of work.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important piece to this, is that a lot of it is like, independence is harder for our community. That's what this is, but it's like a lot of work for long-term gain.
Yeah, so teaching Jackson how to get dressed in the morning, I think took us, probably 7, 8 months of 1 hour of being in his room and prompting him through how to get dressed every morning and how to pick out his clothes and where to put his clothes. But man, he is like neater than my daughter is. Like Maria throws her clothes all over her room. Jackson's always puts his away, and Jackson picks out his own clothes. And sometimes he comes down and we're like, "You're gonna wear that?" And he's like, "Yeah." Like, okay, like I would have put that outfit together, but if that's what you want to wear, you go for it, dude. But it took us 6 months of really concentrated effort and a lot of time and energy, but the payoff is huge because now we don't worry or think about it at all anymore.
Hey, Michelle, can I ask how old Jackson is?
He's 11.
Okay, I feel like I am so looking forward to the day when that's our situation also. And so I was just curious to see how I've been trying in the back of my head, I have all the problem solving wheels going all the time about all the things. And so that's one that I am like in my head trying to problem solve.
Yeah, and I think it's like being very deliberate. I think one of the hardest things that we see that there are a lot of things to work on, right? So we're like, we're going to work on all of them. And then we don't work on any of them efficiently, right? Because we've just completely overtaxed ourselves. So what I would
Yes.
always suggest is like pick one thing. So for forever, it was, getting dressed. That's it. That's all we focused on. Can he get himself dressed? Okay. Then once he could do that, and again, that's steps. That's a lot of stuff from stepping stones. That's a lot of breaking things down. That's a lot of chaining. That's a lot of work that went into that. But then once he got that, it was like, okay, can we teach him how to open his breakfast bar on his own, throw away his trash? We teach him then how to, turn on his remote or his TV. And so it's all a stepwise process. But I think the hard thing is we try to tackle everything at once and then we burn out because that's a lot. Like our kids need steps for everything, right? Like putting on his shoes is like a 5-step process that I never even thought about, right? And somebody broke it down, putting in his shoes in 5 steps, and I was like, oh, I didn't even think about it that way, right? But it's like, so don't do, putting on shoes independently and then putting on socks independently, right? Like you have to like take them one little step at a time to kind of build up to that. I mean, he's still not independent everywhere, right? Because we didn't tackle everything at the same time. He's mostly independent now in brushing his teeth. My husband has pretty much got that locked down. He still needs help showering, but we're getting there, right? So it's like all of this stuff does not happen overnight, but being very thoughtful about how you're going to achieve that goal and really like taking small steps at a time to get there. I think so you don't get burnt out and so you actually do it. Because it's hard to like try to do all the things at once.
Amy or Courtney, who wants to share your challenging situation?
Sorry, Teddy was banging on my door with a stick for a second there, so I was waiting until that stopped. I think for me, the hardest thing for independent living for Kemp has been finding the right team who believes in him and holds him accountable, who presume competence. The thing about Kemp is he's very, very cute. He's so cute, you guys, and he's so cuddly.
He's so cute.
The sweetest little smiles. And you know that when he rolls over to you and grabs your hand, that is just the best compliment. Everyone wants Kemp's love. But what I have to drive home sometimes with the school team is that's very sweet. And I want you to love my kid, but he is not there to cuddle with you, right? He's there to work on skills. He's there to use his communication device consistently, even if he does not want to. He can take a break. And I know it's hard to see him sad, but sometimes we get sad and that's okay. Validate that feeling, help him work through it. He's not there to cuddle. And fortunately, we have a great team at school, but there are some reminders. And I know they use me as the bad guy, which is fine. His aide, they call his school mama, and she'll tell me when he gets sad, I tell him, your mom told me you have to do this. Like, well, I mean, all right. I did, but his speech therapist, who I just mentioned, is wonderful, and she catches every little thing that he does, every step towards progress she sees and validates. He needs people around him that see his potential, and they don't say it in like a sweet condescending way. They see it as actual valid, real potential. It's not, inspiration porn potential. It's real. He's a person who has all kinds of growth and strengths, and we have a wonderful babysitter who works on skills with him. So I think the biggest challenge is the people who are in his life are people that believe in him and are working towards goals, and they understand and acknowledge that he's cute. You can't look at him and not acknowledge that he's cute, you guys. He's delicious. He's a delicious boy. But to see beyond that and see the potential is huge for the team that works with him.
And I love how you pointed out, like, it's okay. I think part of dignity of risk and like what makes all of this kind of complicating and consumer control and really any of it is that it can be emotionally very difficult. And I think sometimes it's our instinct to avoid difficult emotions. It's our instincts to avoid being sad or disappointed. Like failure is hard. When you fail at something, it's hard. It's emotional. And I think like they need to learn to deal with those emotions, just like they need the skills, just like anybody else. They're not hiding, they're never going to be able to hide from those emotions. So it's important that they learn how to work through them.
Yeah,
My
and
dog's
another
working through his emotions right now because all of his
the other thing about it,
people are on my Zoom.
like being such good friends with Gabby, with her CP and my son likely having CP as well, I've learned that, you know, sometimes he's crying because it hurts. Therapy hurts. Standing, bearing weight on his legs is hard and it's tiring. And he's falling asleep at school because we just taxed the crap out of his little body and he needs a break. So there's that balance too of pushing him and holding him accountable, but also recognizing the disability of it all and honoring those limits as well.
I wanted to comment that while Gabby was talking, I had this thought. Recently, I found myself while my kids are working through hard things, I found myself like talking to myself in my head saying, don't fix this for them. You have to let them do it. Excuse me, I have something in my throat. And particularly when my kids like do something wrong and then they feel bad for it. And I want that bad feeling to go away. And I'm like, don't fix this. They need to feel bad. They need to work through it. They need to be able to. And so that's kind of my mantra when things get emotionally challenging for the kids is that I just go, don't fix this for them. They have to sit with it for a little bit.
Yeah, I think you hit on something that we do a lot as parents, and I know Gabby and I talk about this a lot, is like that hypervigilance over our children, where we are constantly trying to help and fix and help and fix. And it's like, so then they never learn how to do for themselves. And what we're actually doing is something called learned helplessness, right? We're teaching them how to be helpless, right? Like, so they don't ever learn how to do for themselves and how to figure things out for themselves. And and our kids are going to have a harder time in certain spaces. And so the sooner that they try and fail and try and fail and they start figuring out on their own how to do that, the better off they are. My daughter is also autistic with my son, and we were somewhere and there was another little girl around her. They were like circling each other. They wanted to play with each other, obviously, but none of them were interacting with each other, right? And my mom was there, and my mom was like, do you see that? They want to play with each other. I'm going to go over and introduce them to each other and make sure that they know who their names are. And I was like, sit down. I was like, no. I'm like, she will figure it out. Like, she has to do that. She's autistic. She's shy. She has a hard time approaching people. We can't just run in and do that for her. Like, we have to let her figure out how to do it. Did it take longer? Yeah, they circled each other for another like 10, 15 minutes. But eventually they started playing with each other and introduced each other and played with each other all day. Right. But it's like, I love that you said that, Kelly, because it's our instinct where we're like, we need to help them. They already have a disability. Like, we need to help them more. And it's like, no, stop. Like, just let them try and figure it out on their own. And it
Their
is hard.
lives are hard enough. We
Yeah.
get that one a lot. Their lives are hard enough. And you're right. Nobody is here to tell you that their lives are not harder. I would be lying if I said that. However, they are consistently going to be harder. So you want them to develop the skills to be able to work through that. Amy, what example would you like to give us? Challenging situation that you were able to work through and what helped?
I think for so many challenging. I'll use the example of school. I think this last year was really challenging for Allison. Graduation didn't seem possible. And the hardest part for me was to take a step back and my husband and I, at some point, we both agreed that we had to put it in her hands, whether she could pull it through or not. It had to be her choice. And before, we were doing all the things and trying to push her closer and closer to graduation, whatever that may like. So in the SPED meetings and conversations with her, it was just a constant battle. And we were in trying to find a balance of pushing, not pushing. But at some point we were just like, this is on her. And that's a really hard thing as a parent, right? Like you said, Michelle and Kelly, like we are designed to fix. We want to fix the situation. We don't like uncomfortable feelings. Society says kids should graduate, right? Like we want that. We are so focused on that. But at the end of the day, like it couldn't be my it was on her. It was on her to do that. And so we took a complete step back, knowing that there was a chance she wouldn't graduate and being okay with that. But in doing so, we saw a huge growth in her. She decided it was important. She was able to find motivation. I wasn't motivating her. I wasn't waking up and setting my alarm to get her up to do the classes, to do a thing. If she missed a class, she missed a class. We totally just let her be in charge. And when we did that, she started getting up. She would work until 9 or 10 o'clock at night on her choice. She got motivated to finish, and she finished. It was all on her. When people are like, oh, congratulations. I always congratulate Allison. This had nothing to do with me. This had to do with, there was supports around her if she needed, but she had to come up with a motivation. And that was just really, really challenging to do. And it was challenging for all of us. The house was dysregulated. She was dysregulated for a while. I was dysregulated. But she decided on her own that it was important. And that accomplishment was her accomplishment. I think that's the biggest reward of all. When she stood up on that stage and grabbed her diploma, like it was so emotional for me, because I know how hard it took her to reach that level. And it was her. It was completely 100% her doing. And so proud. But yeah, I wanted to step in and fix, and realized that wasn't my job in that sphere right now in this phase of our life. It was her job, and
I think
she needed to advocate.
It's important to point out that Allison herself worked up to that, right? It wasn't just like one day nothing is your responsibility and the next day everything is your responsibility, right? Like she needed to know that she had the skills, but it still needed to be her choice. So like she worked very hard for like a year before that, like figuring out who she was and figuring out what was important to her and figuring out what advocating looked like and all of these things. And at one point it was like, guys, she has the skills. So now she has to make the choice. We can't keep fixing it. But she went into that knowing that she had the skills. And at some point, even me, like I said to her very honestly, I was like, Allison, this is all on you now. Like you've got to decide if you want this bad enough, and you've got to do it. Like you have to step in and just do the things now. But I wouldn't say that to somebody that I didn't know was gaining the skills to do it. And so like, this is why giving them this confidence now and as early as possible is so important. Because at some point, like Amy said, you can't fix it all. And they've got to take personal responsibility. And Amy, can you do me a favor and tell the potty training story? Because I think that's a big one.
Yeah. So we did potty train Jace about a year ago, which it's crazy to think about. He is 8. And his rare disorder, there's not a lot of information to go on. So a lot of the older kids are not potty trained. So it wasn't like this is something that's capable, like they're capable of. Like it's not pushed. It's just like, oh, just stick them in a diaper forever. And we had tried over the years with failure. We didn't succeed. But last year I was like, I'm going to make this my goal. I'm going to try. I want to try again. And we did. And so Jace needs help to go to the bathroom. He needs an enema. Actually, the story gets better and better, but he needed an enema to go to the bathroom, to go big potty. And I was like, how am I going to work this? Because one, I wanted him to be independent. I wanted him to have his own autonomy. And what we did was I was having a conversation with my best friend who's a teacher for many, many years. And she's like, well, I was actually thinking about the car. I was like, what if I get him potty trained and he's in the car? Like, how is he going to tell me if he doesn't have his device or if I can't hear it? I usually tune people out. She's like, what about a doorbell? And I thought, wow, oh, that's interesting. So we use doorbells in the kindergarten classroom all the time. Get a doorbell. So we had all these things. I thought, okay, maybe this will work. So we put up like a vision board for him in the bathroom. Jace usually doesn't respond to like steps, but I thought if it's just visible for him, we had the doorbell in the car, the doorbell in the bathroom with a little help sign. So we didn't have to stand over him. He could go in the bathroom, but if he needed help, he could ring the doorbell and I would come. We saw immediate progression in when he had to pee. He got it pretty quickly. And that was just like letting him run around in underwear, just taking the diaper off and letting him get used to it. And he picked it up rather quickly. And then he started using the doorbell. And at first it was, he needed help for certain tasks, but he now started asking for medication, not asking. I'd go in and I'd give him a choice. Do you need meds? Do you need your enema? Yes or no? And he would say yes or no. And I would go with it. Yes, no. Jace also needs to have, because of his CP and his low muscle tone, like he squats on the toilet to go to the bathroom. And he started, because I don't even know why, but I think because we gave him his own autonomy, we let him have the choice. He just latched on really fast and we gave him the supports. And we are seeing progress even a year later. Like he's not needing as many enemas because I think he's using those muscles. He goes in there, he handles his business, and then he rings his doorbell for me to come in and help him wipe. And I'm just always like, still like, I go in there and I'm so amazed. I'm like, you did it. Like you didn't need meds or anything. Like you're progressing even now. So like, it was very challenging because the society was telling me, no, 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 no. It's not possible. You can't do it. These kids can't do it. And I just didn't want to settle for that because I knew Jace is very smart. I knew if we could give him the right tools, he could try. We had to think outside of the box. But we did. And when we did that, we saw success. Now we're at a new challenge that we're trying to focus on. For some reason, Jace hates pull-ups and he only has to wear a diaper at night because he gets medicated to go to sleep. So he's not going to wake up if he has to go to the bathroom. Jace hates pull-ups. I don't know why. If I come at him with a pull-up, he is already yelling at me, no, 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 no. And he goes and grabs me a diaper and brings me the diaper. So now that is a new challenge as to why Jace will not use a pull-up, because diapers are terrible and he's peeing through them at night and I'm having to change sheets and I'm not happy. And he's not happy when he wakes up like that. But I'm like, we're trying to think out of the box as to why and how to fix that. But the potty training story is probably our most successful story recently, like with Jace, because he did it and he's doing it and he's progressing even now. Like I said, he's not needing as many enemas, where these kids in his peer group are taking Miralax and enemas and having major digestive doctors involved. And I'm like, we're not having to do that with Jace. And so great independence that I don't have to use a changing table anymore.
Yeah.
And also that he can be, hopefully that he can be inspirational for our new families, that it is possible to do this. Because like Gabby said, we take what we get, right? And if we're only getting so much information that this isn't going to work, that you can't do it, they can't do it, it's not going to work for you, then you do that, you follow that road, and we don't have to always follow that road.
No, the roads were paved a really, really, really long time ago, and nobody's updated them. And so we have to do it ourselves a lot. But that also is a really important example. And I know Kelly's son was recently potty trained as well. That's just a really big one for me that sticks out, because if you're not going to the bathroom independently and you have the ability to do so, not everybody does, but if you do, it's impeding your ability to be fully independent. So I always love that story. We are at
And
our
teaching the
last-
family too, Gabby, like teaching the family was hard, right? The girls wanted to run in there and help him. And I'm like, no, just stand at the door and listen for him. Like, stand at the door. Don't hover over him while he pees. Nobody wants to watch you pee.
Yeah.
Like, teaching the whole family, like, give Jace his autonomy. Let him dictate if he needs help or not. And that was a really big concept, even for my girls to grasp.
Yeah. And it does, it takes everybody in the house being on board. And so our last question for the four of you is just, what advice would you give to our participants here today in making this shift in thinking, and what do you want them to know? Because as we've all said, this parts of this are not easy, but it's also very rewarding. So what advice do you want to make sure you give before we wrap up?
I think the biggest one for me, we talk about this a lot, especially in the non-speaking communities, is the idea of assuming competency in our kids. Having that belief system that they are there, they are intelligent, they are capable. I mean, you have to have that before you can do any of the rest of this, right? Like, you have to believe that your kids are capable of more, that they are in there, that there is just a lot to uncover, and just to have that faith and to set higher bars for our children, I think is just so important. Jackson, is 11 and says like 5 words, right? But he can spell things like non-Newtonian fluid. Okay. So it's kind of one of these things where it's like, believe that your kids are in there and push them to not settle, and like push them to excel always, because they are capable of a lot more than what society makes us think that they're capable of, to go back to Amy's point.
Yeah.
I feel like for me, it always goes back to the team again. It's hard to find a solution if you don't have smart people around you, or creative people, or experienced people. Our speech therapist has all kinds of ideas I never would have considered. His teacher comes up with things and she thinks it's a no-brainer, but I never would have thought of this very simple strategy. Finding people that believe in him, like Michelle is saying, in the competence piece, but then they also have tools and experience at their disposal as well to come up with solutions that fit your kid. I mean, all kids are like this, right? But our kids in particular, they are not one size fits all. What works for one autistic kid will not work for another autistic kid, and so on. So having people at your disposal who have those ideas and those resources, I think is really, really important to be successful. Perseverance, your own creativity, get to know your kid, learn what their nonverbal cues are if they're not speaking, just kind of sitting with it and not giving up, I guess, is the bigger picture of it all.
Yeah. Kelly, what would your piece of advice be?
Well, I was like making notes and thinking about it. You guys were talking about, And I have like a whole lot that I could say, which probably doesn't surprise most of you, but I think one of my biggest ones would be that I would recommend shifting the mindset from my child has a disability, so he can't fill in the blank, to okay, it's going to look different. What does he need to have so that he can do whatever the fill in the blank is? That was a big, big, big thing for me. And sometimes, in fact, most of the times, maybe even all the times, it's going to look different. My example of this that probably after I've been Henry's mother for 40 or 50 years, my example of this will probably always be this very first one. And I was at his IEP meeting early in the year, and we'd been 3 or 4 weeks into school, and his gen ed teacher said, "Do you want me to start sending home the homework?" And I thought, well, and I said this out loud, I said, well, the special ed teacher doesn't send home homework because she works them really hard during school and she knows they have therapies and all of these things. And so she doesn't push homework. And I kind of like that because we are working really hard across the board. But if the goal is to get him into the general ed class more and more, and hopefully at some point full time in the general ed class, that's going to mean homework. And so she said, tell you what, I will send it home and you guys can do what you can do. And I was like, okay, great. Yeah, that sounds great. So she sent it home and it was spelling homework. That's what she was sending home every week. And my sweet little boy, who was by then in first grade, had been practicing writing his name every day for 2 or 3 years, and he still could not write his name. And I thought, how on earth are we going to do spelling homework if the boy can't write those 5 letters that he's been writing every single day? You know, the tracing the paper with the dry erase marker. But I have learned that we don't say he can't spell. We're going to figure out what he needs so that he can spell. It's going to look different, but we're going to figure it out. So I talked to some people and I thought some stuff. And where I ended up was that he has an AAC device that he uses pictures for a lot. But it also has a keyboard on it. And so he's very good at pushing buttons. And so I said, okay, we're going to do spelling homework. And so he has to see one word at a time. If he looks at the list, he's going to get overwhelmed and stop. So I usually put each word into a Google slide so I could just swipe it on my phone to the side when we were done. I'd hold it up and he would tap his word out and he would say the word and say the letters. And that boy is learning how to spell because I didn't look at it when I think most of the world would have said, there's no way he can do spelling homework. There's just no way. And so shifting the mindset from he can't to he can, but what does he need to do to be able to get at the heart of this activity or this skill or this whatever it is? He didn't need to be able to handwrite those words. And sometimes we just look at it for what it's always been. You know, it's always been that you do spelling homework by handwriting them. But if we can think through what it is that they need from that skill. So that's my big one. And then the close second I would say is to take it a little bit at a time. This whole thing can seem so overwhelming. Like raising a non-disabled child is overwhelming, and our children take so much more effort and time and resources. And so just go a little bit at a time. And so the way I've been looking at it is if I want Henry to be having age appropriate experiences and expectations at age 7, then I think, okay, what's the next thing? Like, what's the next thing that a typical 7-year-old, oh, we don't say typical, that a non-disabled 7-year-old, thank you. Sometimes if I say it out loud, I get better at doing it right. But a non-disabled 7-year-old, like, what are they doing? And sometimes it's like they're playing video games. I'm like, okay, so we need to do some video games, or we need to, they're going to the store with their mother. So we go to the store, or like all of those things. But if you just go a little at a time instead of, like Amy said, do it, I think Amy said, at some point, trying to take on too many things, trying to be like, oh, we need to do this and this and this and this and this, and we don't have to do all of them right now, but just what what's good for the age, what's a new skill that they can adopt.
Thank you. That was awesome. All right, Aim, what's your advice?
My advice on independence is, and I'll just say it like this, if I could go back to Amy 10 years ago, or, Alice is 18. So let's say, even 15 years ago, what I would tell myself. And I would tell myself, grace, give yourself grace. You don't know what you don't know. So if there's anyone in here that's like, I haven't done any of these things, none of us knew all the time. Like, this isn't what society teaches us. This is not even what some of our families have taught us, or our peers. So like, I don't even have it together all the time in this journey. My oldest is 21. New things happen all the time. So grace, you don't know what you don't know. So don't beat yourself up, because we're moms, and let's face it, we love to, beat ourselves up and have guilt. And be open to learning new ideas, and advocate for those when those spaces that don't show it, like around our families, in the school setting. Teach by example in those areas when it comes to independence. You just, like Courtney said, establishing that team sometimes just is such a relief when people are on board with you. So, in those spaces of IEPs, I'm always saying, like, our North Star is independence. I actually had a teacher tell me that Jace was too independent. I don't really know what that is, but and I had to do a little education in that moment. But yeah, just one day, one step at a time sometimes, especially with some of us that have these older kids, that this just wasn't something that we incorporated. If you did do all the things, fabulous. But if you haven't, or you this is all very new for you, like, don't stress. Like, it's always okay to start from this point forward and incorporate independence where you can. It looks different for all of us on the panel. Independence looks different in all of our families. So that's what I would say.
Yeah. Thank you all for the advice. This is why these four lovely ladies are the ones answering these questions. And I think my biggest piece of advice is, first of all, everything that they said, and then the one thing I would add is to make your kids part of this process. Talk to them about it. Talk to them about what their life looks like. Talk to them about what they want to be able to do. Talk to them about what their dreams are and what their hopes are and what their desires are. Because, like, my mom said to me over and over, okay, you want to be independent, you want to go to school, you want to do all these things, you're going to have to work at that a little harder. So I know this is hard and I know it's frustrating, but if you want these things, we got to do it. And it wasn't like an arbitrary, we're doing it for a rainy day. It was like, we're doing it because these are the things that you want. And so we got to work on it now. And then just acknowledging that there's going to be a lot of emotions behind a lot of this. No surprise that comes from the therapist in the room, but like, a lot of this comes with a lot of emotions. Some of them are great and some of them are challenging, and that's okay, but that should all be part of the conversation. And then I'll say it again, you don't actually know until you try. So you're going to get a lot of messages that this isn't possible or that isn't possible, but your kid's not like that kid that couldn't do it, because no two are the same. And my guess is they were capable, they just didn't have the tools. So you don't actually know unless you try. So to wrap this up, our last ask of anybody on this Zoom, whether you want to do it in the chat or privately in the WhatsApp, for those of you that are in the WhatsApp, or you want to email it, we just ask that you just take a couple minutes and give us a reflection about what you've heard today, whether it's what you've learned or a takeaway that you want to take with you and use, or something that really stuck with you, just taking the last couple of minutes and putting a couple sentences together for us so we can use the data would be awesome. So whatever way is easiest for you guys to do that. You have our emails by now. You have our WhatsApp, and we'll leave the chat open for a few minutes too. But thank you guys so much for joining us.
Gabby, I know I didn't mention it when we were talking, but your final remarks reminded me, like, also like including the whole family too on some of those conversations, because
Yeah.
we tend not to do that. We focus on the kid and we don't focus on the family and the siblings and the spouse or the partner in the home. And if we can all be on the same page, sometimes that really helps create independence in the home for everyone.
Agreed.
And I'm sending you, I know you can't see the chats, I'm sending the testimonials to you via text.
Thank you. Walter. Hi, puppy.
I just love a dog named Walter.
You're muted, but hi, Walter.
Oh, he's so cute, Courtney.
He's been my
Good.
therapy dog lately.
Yes.
Oh,
Walter, do you miss me? Yes.
oh, he's so
Yeah.
cute.
Miss Aunt Gabby.
Yeah. Look how cute he is. And fluffy. Michelle, remember when we went to see him and she brought him out to the car and he was so tiny?
So cute. Yes, so cute.
He's not so
Oh.
tiny anymore, but he's
Oh.
still really cute.
He's huge. He looks
Court,
huge.
did you know he was gonna get that big?
Kind of, but not really. He's a little bigger than we expected, but not by a lot.
He's
He's
so
smaller
cute.
than Luna.
Yeah, he is smaller than Luna.
So as far as I'm concerned, he's tiny.
Hello to our guests in the car. Hi.
Driving. Oh, you're muted. I think that's
All right.
we got a few people commenting.
Thank you, Bridget.
Yeah.
What's everybody's the rest of your Saturday look like? Are we doing anything fun?
I have to take kids to a birthday party.
Jane is at her very first birthday party, like with a friend that she made all by herself right now.
Oh,
I know.
that's
I'll
cute.
hear about that. Thomas took her.
That's so cute. Guys, I say it every time, but it's so funny. I do sessions from home all the time, and neither one of my dogs say anything. And then the second the three of you, any of the three of you are on my computer, my dog loses his mind. He's obsessed with Amy and Courtney and Michelle. So like if he hears their voices coming through the screen, I have no luck. I can't, like he just goes nuts.
All right. Are we ready for our send-off music?
Yes, we are.
Oh, send off music?
Oh, no, can you hear? I'm sorry.
Michelle, a few minutes.
I can stay, Michelle, can you stay?
For a little bit, yeah.
Okay, cool. Oh, look, she's playing Ludacris. We're getting ready, guys.
What's up, prom 2004? On that
Yeah.
note, I gotta go parent you guys.
That's why it's at 6 tonight.
Bye.
Yep. Bye.
Thank you, Aurora, for your
Oh, yes,
testimonial.
thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Seems like a lot of people are cleaning today.
Lots of
30-second dance party. Go. Dance before you clean, everyone. A lot of people are
Oh
cleaning
wow,
apparently.
we're recording this for anybody that watches it.
Nothing wrong with a 30-second dance party.
No.
Hi, CR. Second dance party.
Thank you, Aurora. I'm very excited.
A ludicrous song. Sorry.
Yes, you could. Yes, you could. You just don't know that it's.
Have
not
you
funny.
seen him reading Llama Llama Red Pajama?
Yes. And it's
I haven't
so
seen that. That's one of our favorites. Oh my gosh. I'm gonna have to look it up.
It's really,
We
really
read-
cute.
We read the Mad at Mama book every night. Every single night. We're obsessed with the llama books. I have to look that one up.
Funny.
Bridget also said to have a